So, today we're going to be talking about how to overcome self doubt and the fear of failure. And I know a lot of people, including myself, who definitely have this issue of failing and doubting yourself and doubting your decisions. I know for me, and especially in growing my own business and just even doing the work that I do, which is helping people, I always questioned my ability to help people. I always question my ability to help people move past point A to point B. And when I first got into the field of therapy and coaching, it was, I remember I had supervisors and people always tell me, Evan, you just trust yourself, trust yourself, trust yourself. And I would be like, how are these people trusting themselves? I don't understand how they can just go into these sessions and just help people without um, worry or doubt. And I question everything. I literally question my ability to know what I know. And I'm the type of person that loves to learn and loves to gain knowledge and research new information. So I always had all this information that people just knew I had, but I never felt comfortable sharing it. And so that was definitely one way that I struggled with a lot of the self doubt. And when it came to fear of failure, I always imagined myself not doing the right thing or not having enough tools to support exactly what it is that I wanted to do. I thought once I got into um, this field, once I got into living my life and like living in my whole destiny and my whole purpose, that I would just fail because that's what I was taught. I didn't know that I could be an entrepreneur. I didn't know that I could live in my purpose without having to work this like severe 9 to 5. I didn't know those things were possible because that's how my world taught me. That's how my environment taught me. That's just how I grew up. And when I started breaking out of that mode, the fear grew bigger. The fear of, oh my gosh, well, what if I don't make it? What if my family says, I told you so? I hated that phrase. I told you so. And that was the worst thing that I could hear. And so when I started moving past that, I started recognizing that it had nothing to do with me. That in order for me to really do what I want to do and to live in the way that I want to live, I had to just do it and do it even afraid, do it even with the fear of failure, and do it even with the doubt, because those things are going to come and creep up along your journey and along your path, and it's actually okay. So today we're going to talk about different reasons why self-doubt is it plagues a lot of us, as well as the fear of failure. And then I'm going to give you some tools and some tips on how to move beyond that. And then we're going to dive into our meditation, releasing those fears. And then I'll teach you how to create your own meditation practice or your own stillness practice. And so if you see me looking down, it's because I'm looking at my notes over here and I have all my things written down so I can be intact. I can definitely go off track. Welcome. Nice to see you, Constance. It's good to have everybody on. All right, so let's just dive right in. So, some of the reasons why self doubt creeps in and the fear of failure is because of our comparison to other people. That's the first thing. Comparison to other people is a bitch. Like, we can get into this mindset that we are not good enough based off of how somebody else's life looks and how somebody else is able to perform. When in reality, we have no clue how that person's life really is in their own internal struggle. And that is one of the biggest things that I see, especially within the work that I do, especially within my own journey and a lot of my own friends' journeys. When we get into the space of comparing ourselves to the other person, it makes it really difficult for us to see ourselves for who we are and to see ourselves for our own personal growth. It makes it really, really hard. And when we get into that comparison trap, it gets hard to get out of it because you're now moving into the space of the second reason why self-doubt and fear of failure kicks in, which is you start reminding yourself of how things used to be or what you're lacking. So That is the biggest thing. That's the second one. You remind yourself of the past and how it used to be, or what you're lacking. You're focusing on what you don't have or what you're lacking. And these things definitely get in the way of how you trust yourself. When you start imagining, oh, how my life used to be versus how your life is right now, it creates a massive struggle. And a lot of people who know me know that I am a free bird. I like to fly, I like to do whatever it is that I want to do. And so sometimes when I get in spaces where it creates a lot of friction and a lot of tension for me, I start feeling trapped, because the thing that happens in my mind is I'm comparing my the present life to my old life, and imagining, oh, this is how it used to be. I wish it could get back there. When we do that, we are constantly negating everything that we stand for in the moment. We constantly negate all of our present actions. And when we stay so far in the past, it creates so much anxiety and so much tension and so much stress. And it makes us angry. We start getting a lot of resentments. We start hating where we are. We start feeling guilty. We start feeling burdened. We start feeling trapped. And when we're in that space, it makes it really hard for us to move forward, because what then happens once we start remembering how it used to be, we start feeling lack. And this is where we start to focus heavily. We start thinking, well, I don't have this, or I'm not going to have this. If I do X, Y, and Z, if I take a leap of faith, I'm not going to have blah, blah, blah. If I leave my full time job, I'm not going to make any money. If I, you know, if I leave this relationship, then who's going to love me, etc., etc., etc. When you focus on the thing you're not going to have, this is where a lot of depression kicks in for a lot of people. And a lot of women that I've worked with in the past and continue to work with struggle with this piece right here. The depression gets really heavy. If you want to get out of depression, I always say the best way is to stop comparing your present life to how things used to be. Stop focusing on the lack that you feel you have. Focus on all the things going right. And we'll get into that a little bit later, focusing on all the things going right. And then the third reason why self doubt and failure creeps in, fear of failure creeps in, is because we focus on what other people say, right? We focus on how we're comparing ourselves to others. So we focus on what they tell us. And in this particular piece, this is where a lot of people are afraid of judgment. We're afraid of what other people are going to say. I know for me and my story, it's been that way. I've been so afraid of what my parents are going to say, what my family's going to say, what my friends are going to say. What are people going to say about me? And in reality, it doesn't really matter. But when we focus on what other people tell us or what they say about us, or we put their opinion over our own, it makes it really hard to get out of this self-doubting space, and it makes it hard to get out this fear of failure space. So let's talk about the tips that I want to give you so we can dive into this meditation. So the tips I want to give you about how to overcome self-doubt and fear of failure and is three tips. So the first tip is to pause and say stop. Now, this is where anybody who knows me and has done any work with me, I am all about awareness. You cannot get to your goals if you do not have any awareness. You cannot create a life without having any investment into your own self. And you cannot really move forward if you don't know what you're thinking, what you feel, how you act, and what you believe. It doesn't work that way. And so the very first step is to pause. Literally pause. When you catch yourself in that self-doubt and you catch yourself in that fearful space, take a pause and tell yourself to stop. Literally. This is what's called thought stopping. Thought stopping is literally telling yourself to stop thinking the thing that you're thinking in that moment and move it into a different direction. Now, our thoughts is definitely a symptom of how and what we believe. So if you have a belief system, here's an example. I've heard this example, and I'll go ahead and use it. I've heard many women say before that men don't listen, or all men lie, or all men cheat, or whatever the case may be. And I've heard that phrase from so many people, or I'll never find love, or it's hard to find love, or it's hard to date. And when you have that belief system playing out in your head, you're on an automatic track to definitely failing. Okay. This is what happens. When we have a belief system of lack, or not happening, or not good enough, then we get into the space where our thoughts become our feelings, and we trickle down this spiral, going deep and going down into this space where we don't feel good about our situation, or we find it really hard. Now, if you know anything about the universe and you know anything about energy, the universe will always be in support of whatever you believe. So if you believe you'll never feel better, then the universe is going to support that and say, all right, you won't feel better. If you believe you'll never find love, or it's hard to find the right person to date, then the universe will make that happen for you. So whatever you put out there within your belief system is what's going to be reflected back to you in your daily environment, your world, and everything. Because ultimately, the thing that you believe is what you start to have thoughts around. So now you start thinking with a belief system of lack, you start thinking with lack. So all of your thoughts are looking at all the things that you can't do, all the reasons why it won't happen, all the reasons why it's not possible. That's what happens when you are in that self-doubting and fear of failure space. Both of those two go hand in hand. When you are afraid of failure, then you can't trust yourself. This is why these two are the topics today, because they both go hand in hand. And so your job is to really activate that pause, really stop what you're thinking and put a pause on it, and then change that thought to something that's going to get you to what you want. And this is where some people say positive affirmations kick in. I have a different belief about positive affirmations. I think positive affirmations are great, and positive affirmations are wonderful if they're done in the appropriate order. Not everybody can just jump into positive affirmations and it works for them. I think you have to do a lot of clearing of your own emotional way of being in order for positive affirmations to actually be effective. And if you have a lot of old wounds and a lot of old history and a lot of old things in your past that's creating these belief systems, these old stories, then positive affirmations aren't going to work. Positive affirmations going to feel like bullshit, and it's never going to work for you. And you're going to be like, I tried it and it didn't work. But it's not until you slowly start to assess those old wounds. So that leads me to the second tip. Get a journal and write down why you believe what you believe. Ask yourself the question, where did this belief come from? Where did this belief come from? Where did I inherit this story about lack and doubt and not trusting myself and fear and failure and not being deserving enough and not being worthy enough? Where did I inherit those belief systems? And really sit with that question. Most of you will find earlier spaces in your childhood or growing up where you first heard a lot of these messages. And not because your parents or your caregivers or the adults around you wanted to feed those messages to you. They thought they were protecting you, and they thought that this was the only way to live. So really assessing that, the minute you can assess where those belief systems came from, and the minute you can assess where those stories, who they came from, then you can recreate a new story. Now that you realize, okay, so I learned, well, I'll give you guys a story of mine. I learned from my mother that all men were bad. All men were bad. As a kid, I don't have anything to compare that to except for her expression and understanding of that. So as a result of that, every guy in my life was bad. They took advantage of me. They were They were always very uh, rude or disrespectful, or I never felt safe around them. And it's because I had inherited this false belief system that had nothing to do with my truth. So you've got to question, why do I believe the things that I believe? When I got out of that mindset, I started attracting wonderful, beautiful people, men who actually are emotionally capable of expressing themselves, who know how to talk, who can communicate easily, who are interested in learning, who are safe and who are respectful. No one's taking advantage, right? These are the things that I had to change in order to make my reality different. So that's the second step. Really assess where that belief system came from and why you have fear of failure and fear of self doubt. All right, so then we move on to the third piece. I actually have a couple different tips here. Um, the third tip is remind yourself that the person criticizing you and has a negative opinion on what you do and how you live has nothing to do with you. It has absolutely zero things to do with you. And here's the thing, whenever you've worked with me, and if you haven't worked with me, one of the things that I always teach is that people are responsible for their own emotions, their own thoughts, and their own actions, which means that when someone makes you feel bad, they didn't make you feel bad. You made yourself feel bad for believing that everything that this person said was true. You made yourself feel bad. And that person had nothing to do with it. So just the same, it's the same thing. So if somebody's criticizing you, it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with what they believe about you and about themselves. It's not true. It's just their story. And their story does not have to be your story. So just because someone says something about you, it's okay to push that story to the side and say, you know what? That's not my story. That's their story. And come back into what the truth of your story is. So I remember when I first got into psychology, and my mother was like, you're gonna be a therapist. They don't make money. Therapy people don't make money. When I got into school and graduate school, that was the thought. Everybody kept saying, you don't get into this field to make money. Therapists don't make money. People don't pay for therapy. They don't do this and they don't do that. And then that was a thought that I believed. When I got out of school, that belief system and those thoughts definitely manifested. I was broke for the first time in my whole life. I was poor. I couldn't pay bills. I didn't even know how I was going to get groceries. I didn't know what was going to happen. I just knew that I couldn't make money. I was like, oh, see, I don't this is why I should have been a therapist. I should have listened to people. And the more I fed that belief system, the more it grew into my own doubting my own ability to doubt myself. And I knew that I had all this training, I had all these skill sets, I had went to school, I got all this debt, and I'm not making money. I remember one year I brought home $5,000 for all 12 months. $5,000. I remember my sister saying to me, girl, you are in poverty. And I looked at her and we kind of laughed because it was ridiculous that I allowed myself to live on $5,000 for one year of doing all this work. And I said, something's got to change. I can't live like this anymore. And what I dived into was assessing my belief system. So I went back to step number 2. I made sure that this belief wasn't my own and I changed it. And then every person who kept telling me after that, you don't make money, you don't make money, I would then say to them, oh, absolutely, you can make money because I'm making money. And people would be like, well, how are you making money? And I would tell them, because the belief system was that if I got on the bandwagon with every other therapist out there who's struggling to support themselves and to support their bills, that I would just be one out of the many flocks And I don't know if many of you know this, but that is the biggest thing. I think a lot of people believe therapists make a lot of money and they don't. And the reason they don't make a lot of money is because they have a belief system that they won't make money. And I think that's true for anyone. So the third tip is to not allow people to criticize your goals. If you want money, make money. If you want a healthy relationship, get a healthy relationship. If you want to be better in your communication, work on it. If you want to have more peace and less stress, you've got to do a stillness practice. So keep that in the back of your mind. Anytime someone criticizes you about how you're moving and what you're doing, it has nothing to do with you. Not one bit. Alrighty, and so then the fourth step is reminding yourself that setbacks are temporary. I don't know if anyone has ever heard this quote before, but the quote is, "Failure is necessary for greatness." Um, I absolutely love this quote, and it's because I always used to believe that the minute I had a setback or the minute I couldn't do something, that was the end. I just stayed in it. I just let it take over and I let myself be devastated and I would just live there in that devastation. And you don't have to live in a space of devastation. You don't have to live in a space of fear. You don't have to live in a space of lack. So you must remind yourself that setbacks are necessary. So say sometimes I'll hear people say, I take one step forward and then another step back. One step forward, another step back, and always something's happening to me. It always feels like something keeps happening. Every time I try to get better or every time I try to do this thing, something just comes in and it makes me, it sets everything back. It throws everything off. Now, here is some empathy around that. When your life when you've had a lot of experiences of setbacks, it's really easy to believe that that is just what happens. It's easy to stay there. It's easy to live in the space of every time I try, I fail. It's easy to stay there. It's comfortable, especially when it's happened so many times. But the difference between what I'm saying versus the belief system of failing is that failure is only temporary. Failure is not a fault, it's not a blame, it's not a problem. So when you believe that setbacks are problematic and that nothing's going to get better, and then you stay there in that space, then, like I said before, the universe will grant you that wish. The universe will keep that setback and make it a very, it will be not temporary. It'll just stay there until you decide to release that belief system. So, setbacks are temporary. Really, really reminding yourself that. Because the minute you mess up is the minute you're allowed to flourish. Setbacks are like a doorway being opened, and it's giving you an opportunity to try something different. Setbacks are like friction, and friction is necessary for growth. If you have an old story trying to rub up against your new story, it's going to create a lot of friction. And in order for you to be in this new story, it's going to have to rub up against your old story. There's just no other way. It's asking somebody to change. You're asking your mindset to create a new belief system. And if you've always believed that failure is just definitely a bad thing and it shouldn't happen and it's not even worth happening, then that's your old story. And the minute you try to say, you know what, I'm going to get past this fear of failure, is going to have to rub up against that story. So everything energetically, and this is where energy comes into play, energetically, you're going to draw other experiences into you and into your world that will rub up against that old story, because you have to have more experiences to break you out of that old way of being. And I hope that makes sense. I'm going to say it in a different way. And I don't know, some of you have worked with me before, so you know when I talk about energy. But if you don't know about energy, energy is all around us and is inside of us. And energy is in everything. It's in our thoughts, it's in our actions, it's in our belief systems. And it's in our organs. It's all over the place. Energy is in everything. thing. Energy is always moving, always. Energy doesn't stop moving unless you stop it from moving. The human mind loves to stop energy from moving. And so when you have a belief system that failure is bad and it shouldn't happen, then what happens to this energy is that it keeps moving and it keeps growing. It keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You're going to have experiences that get caught up in this moving spiral of failure. So you'll start a business, it'll fail. You start a relationship, it'll fail. You go to a new doctor and it's not going to work, the treatment's going to fail. All the things. You have a friendship, it's going to fail. Does that make sense? So because it's moving, it's like an orbit. And in order for you to stop this orbit and move it into something different, you're going to have to shut this orbit down. And by saying, okay, wait a minute, actually, failure can happen. Oh, okay, failure can happen. Failure's okay. Setbacks are temporary. It's not a bad thing. Oh, failure is an opportunity for me to grow. You're going to have all these experiences being drawn to you to build this new story up. This is how energy works. Whatever you put out there will come back to you. Whatever you believe will be manifested. Whatever you say is going to be supported by the universe and the divine entities that are blessed within this planet. So you will get what you believe. So in order to get out of this fear of failure, it's going to take a lot of inner dialogue to challenge that fear about failing. It's okay for failure to exist. Fuck ups are necessary. Mess ups are necessary. Mistakes are necessary. And that is the fourth way to get out of this, is to remind yourself that setbacks are temporary. Cool. So I'm going to open up the